If a flying object exists in nature and nobody's around to see it, is it not an unidentified flying object? I mean, say what you will about things people see in the sky, but at least they have been seen. Maybe sometimes they even feel seen. But anyway, if you think about it, any of these UFOs that people see have a much better chance of being identified than all the others that nobody even knows about. What better way to remain unidentified than to avoid being seen in the first place? When it comes to natural phenomena that we don't understand, it strikes me as pretty unlikely that they remain unexplained, because people see them and they are not only very visible in the sky, but also very fantastic and evocative of our own culture's mythos. Instead, it seems the opposite would be the case. I think that any UFOs that remain unidentified do so because they're difficult to spot, they're difficult to document, we don't know what they're supposed to look or act like, and they fly in the face of our closely held expectations. Giant humanoids? What about weird undiscovered types of ionized clouds? Martian airships? What about an explosion of foam from the sea? Giant metal flying saucers from space? What about really weird little bugs from a bog? Let's take earthquake lights as an example. While earthquake lights are controversial and elude explanation, they do seem to exist in some form. Now, I don't think I can prove to you that earthquake lights exist, or if they do, what types there are. I've said it before and I'll say it again. This one's not an expert. But regardless, what we can say of all earthquake lights that do exist is that they are lights in the sky caused by earthquakes. This is because this is how the category of earthquake lights is defined. All lights that are caused by earthquakes are earthquake lights, and nothing else is, by definition. Likewise, UFOs are the category of flying objects that are unidentified by science. At least that's how I tend to define them. Because if we just include anything in the sky that gets unidentified at all, then that could be just about anything. I want to know about the weird stuff. And like UFOs, there could be various different types of earthquake lights with various different physical mechanisms and a wide range of appearances. On the other hand, there might also not be that many types, and the few that exist may be very rare. According to the U.S. Geological Survey's website, quote, phenomena such as sheet lightning, balls of light, streamers, and steady glows reported in association with earthquakes are called earthquake lights, or EQL. Geophysicists differ on the extent to which they think that individual reports of unusual lightning near the time and epicenter of an earthquake actually represent EQL. Some doubt that any of the reports constitute solid evidence for EQL, whereas others think that at least some reports plausibly correspond to EQL. Physics-based hypotheses have been proposed to explain specific classes of EQL reports, such as those in the immediate vicinity of the causative fault at the time of a major earthquake. On the other hand, some reports of EQL have turned out to be associated with electricity arcing from the power lines shaking. Unquote. The way the USGS describes earthquake lights makes it sound to me like they are a legend to science. Scientists do not agree whether earthquake lights exist or what counts as an earthquake light. However, since the 1960s, people have made various photographs and videos of different types of alleged earthquake lights. For example, in April of 2023, a number of people in India posted videos of strange colored light over Delhi right around the same time as a powerful earthquake. But Was what they saw really earthquake lights? Perhaps they could have been observing some artificial lights of some kind that just happened to coincide with the earthquake. In 2019, Friedemann Freund presented a new physical explanation for earthquake lights that happen at the same time as earthquakes. He posits these have to do with geophysical mechanisms along sheets of rock called dikes, which create towering light displays as the seismic waves pass over them. Researchers, including Freund, Robert Theriot, John S. Dare, Michael Godhelmet Persinger, and others have for decades investigated the controversial hypothesis that some luminous displays, such as those in UFO reports, are related to seismic activity and underground strain on particular types of rocks. This is associated with a broader hypothesis called tectonic strain theory. It's the controversial theory that many paranormal events, such as nocturnal lights and poltergeist phenomena, are actually caused by electromagnetic and radiation disturbances originating in tectonic strain. This explanation means, among other things, that strange phenomena would not always even involve any earthquakes at all, but simply tectonic strain. In 2014, Freund, Theriot, and Dare, along with Franz Saint Laurent, published a collection of 65 alleged historic earthquake light events dating from 1600 to the time of their work, along with a study positing that these phenomena are generally correlated to specific types of tectonic rift zones and faults. This study was widely reported in science news sources. The collection includes a whole range of different reported appearances and behaviors for earthquake lights, as well as a whole range of time and distance from an earthquake's epicenter. For example, in one case, globes of light were allegedly photographed at Tagish Lake in southern Alaska, some 300 kilometers from an earthquake's epicenter, which was approximately 30 kilometers under the Gulf of Alaska. Shortly after the paper's publication, skeptic Robert Schaefer noted that the Tagish Lake photo was a large distance from the Cross Sound earthquake epicenter, adding that the incident also has no clear date. The photograph and report of these gold light globes were originally investigated by Martin Jasek for the amateur UFO organization centered in British Columbia, UFOBC. Jasek's report was written in 1998, and according to him, the exact date that the globes were actually photographed is not known, except that it was sometime around 1970. In the conclusion to their 2014 study, Theriot et al. Remark, quote, "When studied individually, some EQL reports may appear questionable. However, a large number of eyewitness reports from certain areas, coupled with similarities with respect to shapes and colors, globes, flame-like luminosities, etc., for incidences in very different regions of the world, should be taken as evidence that EQL occurrences are real and a widespread phenomenon." Unquote. It's odd that they point out similarities in shapes and colors, despite the fact that in the very same paper they also identify a whole variety of different shapes and colors. I previously noted a similar problem with the analysis given in Wonders in the Sky by Jacques Vallée and Chris Aubeck, a collection of pre-modern reports that resemble modern UFO reports. It's also worth pointing out that there are whole varieties of other luminous displays in the sky which are all known to not be caused by earthquakes, such as auroras and crown flashes that I've talked about previously, not to mention artificial phenomena such as arcs and explosions caused by malfunctioning electrical equipment. These issues, together along with the dubious inclusion of the Tagish Lake photo, all cause me to question how reliable the 65 cases are overall. They include among these cases a number of sightings that were reported near the time of the New Madrid earthquake of 1811 and 1812. These were a series of multiple earthquakes of very high magnitude in December of 1811 and again in January and February of 1812. The December earthquake was accompanied by a powerful aftershock, as well as numerous other smaller tremors and quakes lasting for days. The major earthquakes, thought to have been around magnitudes of 7 to 8 on the moment magnitude scale, were felt across a vast area of the eastern United States from Pittsburgh to Washington, D.C., including much of the frontier territories and newly formed states along the Mississippi River. It was named after the town of New Madrid, located on the river's bank in what is today southeastern Missouri. Eyewitness reports from the time describe the Mississippi River instantly sinking huge swaths of land, as well as unexplained bangs and roars, sudden towering spouts of water and minerals from the ground that created sand blows and sand boils, forests instantly being torn asunder, people being swallowed into the ground, sulfur in the air and water, which isn't really that strange, but still noteworthy, I feel, and the list goes on. This event is really a very unique geological event in American history, and it happened to coincide with the Great Comet of 1811, visible for the better part of a year. Aside from just being a long series of fantastic and catastrophic events, the New Madrid earthquakes are surrounded with all sorts of geophysical mysteries, even to this day. Thero et al. List half a dozen separate earthquake flight incidents that were reported in conjunction with this catastrophe, but it's hard to tell whether these incidents were accurately reported. Here is an account I found from a collection of primary reports written by eyewitnesses, which was compiled by Dr. Nathan Morin for the Center for Earthquake Research and Information at the University of Memphis. The account is by a man named Matthias Speed, who witnessed the December quakes firsthand while traveling the Mississippi River. Unfortunately, Speed himself did not apparently witness any unexplained lights by his own account. The only lights mentioned come from the account of another traveler he encountered in the extended December catastrophe. Nonetheless, here is the portion of Speed's report that recounts the other traveler's experiences. As we passed the point on the left hand below the island, the bank and trees were rapidly falling in. From the state of alarm I was in at this time, I cannot pretend to be correct as to the length or height of the falls, but my impression is that they were about equal to the rapids of the Ohio. As we passed the lower point of the island, looking on the left channel, we thought the falls extended higher up on that side than the right. There was one boat coming down on the same morning I landed. When they came in sight of the falls, the crew were so frightened at the prospect that they abandoned their canoe. 2 were left on the island, and 2 made for the west bank in the canoe. About the time of their landing, they saw that the island was violently convulsed. One of the men on the island threw himself into the river to save himself by swimming. One of the men from shore met him with the canoe and saved him. Now, this man gave such an account of the convulsions in the island that neither of the 3 dared to venture back for the remaining man. The 3 men reached New Madrid by land. The one man remained on the island from Friday morning till Sunday evening, when he was taken off by a canoe sent from a boat coming down. I was several days in company with this man. He stated that during his stay on the island there were frequent eruptions in which sand and stone coal and water were thrown up. The violent agitation of the ground was such at one time as induced him to hold to a tree to support himself. The tree sunk down, and he got wounded in the fall. The fissure was so deep as to put it out of his power to get out at that place. He made his way along the fissure until a sloping side offered him an opportunity of crawling out. He states that frequent lights appeared, that in one instance, after one of the explosions near where he stood, he approached the hole from which the coal and sand had been thrown up, which was now filled with water, and on putting his hand into it found it was warm. Unquote. As detailed as this account is, it's very easy to miss the detail about the lights. Quote, he states that frequent lights appeared. Unquote. These could easily just be lights from fires on the riverbanks. A more notorious report is this one from a man named John C. Edwards, which is also secondhand. Quote, I have just seen a gentleman from Knoxville who passed Sunday night with Mr. Nelson at the Warm Springs. From his account, his situation was more terrifying than ours. For several hours previous to the shock, a most tremendous noise was heard from the neighboring mountains. At intervals it was quiet, but would begin with so much violence that each repetition was believed to be the last groan of expiring nature. The shock at that place did but little damage, except to a few huts that were built near the springs for the accommodation of invalids. The fulminating of the mountains was accompanied with flashes of fire seen issuing from their sides. Each flash ended with a snap or a crack, like that which is heard on discharging an electric battery, but 1,000 times as loud. This induced him to believe that the earthquake was caused by the electric fluid. In the morning it was observed that a large stream of warm water, temperature Fahrenheit 142 degrees, issued from a fissure in a rock on the side of the mountain which had been opened the preceding night. While they were examining it, another shock was felt which lasted 2 minutes. Unquote. This account was discussed in great detail in a paper published in the year 2000 by Susan E. Houck, whom Theriot et al. Cite. Houck is a geophysicist researching earthquake hazards for the United States Geological Survey in Pasadena, California. She talks about how there is a second independent version of the Edwards account. In this version, details are clearly exaggerated or made up, and Edwards describes the cause of the whole disaster to actually have been a volcano, though Houck also observes that why someone would have perpetrated this type of hoax is unclear. She contends that the later document was likely forged by someone else besides John Edwards, the true author of the first account. She proposes that what may have happened was that these bright red flashes of fire were not fire at all, but perhaps instead caused by sonoluminescence. This is when water is shaken by very powerful sound waves, so that bubbles inside of it are forced to collapse with such force that they actually produce light. Houck explains that if the salt content of the water is high enough, then the flashes will appear red. She says that Edwards' description is consistent with this, and she also points out that the rest of Edwards' report seems to be consistent with other reports of the December earthquakes. Writes Houck, quote, unfortunately, given that the phenomena at Hot Springs may have only been witnessed by 2 individuals, it appears unlikely that any additional information exists to be gleaned from original sources regarding this particular observation. The discussions presented in this paper are, therefore, speculative in nature. Unquote. None of this is to say that there weren't earthquake lights at New Madrid. That reports exist from the time suggests that there may have been. But basically, this account, much like Matthias Speed's account, cannot ever be verified. And much like the Tagish Lake account, these individual accounts are unreliable. What other unreliable reports were used in building the 65 in the earthquake light study by Thoreau et al.? I will definitely be returning to this paper again, specifically with regards to their research into the New Madrid earthquakes. It seems that until there are more observations and better evidence, earthquake lights are much like UFOs. There is no way of knowing for certain what types there are, how they are caused, or how common they are. Do they exist, or are they largely just based on unreliable reports? Personally, I think there's enough evidence to conclude that at least some earthquake lights probably exist, in some physical sense, and if they do exist, then they are literally unexplained aerial phenomena. I suppose that in a sense we humans are much like them in this way. Because after all, are we also not in some sense unexplained? Do we also not sometimes go up in the sky? Are we also not phenomena?